this time next year, we may well have had our general elections. And while many surveys in the run-up suggest the ANC could be heading for an historic below 50% support at the polls, it could depend on who exactly turns out to vote. The country's third largest party is the EFF, and its 10th anniversary celebration over the weekend showed it could certainly fill a 90,000 capacity FNB stadium at ease. But with a lot of their support base young people, will that translate to more support at the polls? We've seen a number of new parties come to the fore as well, a fair number of younger leaders. Will that attract the youth? Let's talk about this now with Mbali Ntuli from the Groundwork Collective. It's an organisation working with the youth. Mbali, thank you so much for joining us. You know, as a country, we have a very high proportion of young people. We also have a massively high youth unemployment rate. The stakes couldn't be higher for young people. Are youngsters keen to vote next year?
So it's an interesting question because, as you say, we have just over 13 million people that are unregistered to vote, the majority of which are young people, according to the IEC's data. And what we're finding is that young people are feeling that they would rather organize themselves outside of the formal democratic process. And so it's not because they're apathetic. Much of the research shows that young people are organizing in communities and they're trying to find other ways to get themselves heard. However, what that means is that you then start to have a legitimacy problem of what happens in your elections. And we saw it in the last elections in 2021, where only 46% of the population came out to vote. The majority of people sat at home, and a very distressing proportion of young people didn't even bother to register in that last election. And there's reasons for this. 70% of these young people are saying that they are dissatisfied with politics and the way the politics in this country are going, with just close to 49% saying that they don't think that democracy is actually working in South Africa. You also see things coming out of the Afrobarometer studies that have just come out saying 65% are not sure that elections even work. And then very distressing is that 72% of people in that particular survey would be willing to forego elections if they could be ensured security, housing, and jobs. And this is a failure that we must all take on board, because what we've actually done is failed young people, not because they don't care about what happens in their country, but because we haven't made the link to them about the efficacy of having that vote, registering and taking part, being what actually would cause the correlation to having jobs, housing, security. And so we have a great amount of work to do with civic education in this country, and we can't leave it up to just being the IEC, which is why the Groundwork Collective has been doing the kind of work that we're doing. We understand that there's lots of work to be done in that space.
You know, it's interesting that when you interacted with young people, quite a few of them didn't know who I think the Tshwane mayor was, or was it the Joburg mayor? One of the mayors they didn't know of the metros. And you know what? It's been such a complete circus within our metros. And very often, you know, I think we've all looked at the politicians and we just wanted to say, stop it, get your act together, because you have a city to run. And this is across parties. I don't think it's any surprise that a lot of young people don't know who the mayor of a big metro is. To what extent is this a problem that politicians have created by allowing corruption, by not doing their jobs, and by the kind of nonsense we've seen with coalition governments?
100%. So I think that it's not just young people. I think that the majority of us, as you say, are fed up with the way that politicians have been behaving and interacting. And it turns people off political processes in general. And so it's also no wonder that the biggest concerning number of people are also between that sort of 45 to 59 group, who should be the people who are part of the struggle and know what was fought for in this country, but they themselves are also now no longer coming out to vote because they found that the politicians and the way that they behave is so off-putting, and that there seems to be no reason for them to do so. So as I say, we've got a lot of work to do, and it's not just on young people, it's everyone who's feeling the dispiritedness of what's happening. But what is comforting in the results and a lot of the work is that if you do register a young person for the first time and you take them through the entire journey of why it's important to register, and you have civic education like we do in our program, they will 85% be more likely to come out and actually vote for the first time.
So it does, as you say.
It's not even
sorry to jump in, but it does require you to be actively involved and say this is why it's important. And you know, it's interesting. I wanted to ask you if you're seeing parties appealing to young people. I mean, if you think of relatively young leaders, Musi Maimane, Songezo Zibi, there are a number of fairly young politicians who are starting parties. But of course, Julius Malema over the weekend, I mean, he's still fairly young. You know, he filled up that stadium, and he does speak to a lot of the youth issues. I mean, do you think that there are parties for the young people? They just need to perhaps discover them? Or do you think that actually it's a failure of our parties to speak to young people effectively?
I would say that those particular three parties that you mentioned are probably the ones I have seen actually speaking the most to young people and having some kind of messaging and policies towards young people. I would say that our more established political parties have been neglectful of actually speaking to young people. And you would have seen it even in the president's SONA address, as well as even the finance minister's address. Very little about practical ways in which young people are going to be empowered in the next 5 years, or have been recently, except for maybe one or two programs like the YES program, but that are in no way able to take on the scourge of what is the biggest youth problem, which is unemployment. So I'd say that the established parties have certainly lost the ability to speak to young people, and they remain an elusive target for them. The newer parties are doing so, but there's no correlation so far with any data that just having young people or young politicians means that young people will come out. And with this particular generation, which is a 92% penetration rate of smartphones that are able to access digital media, there's also the need for our politics to evolve in this country and to be able to target young people where they are in ways that interest them. And so with our particular campaign, we were able to get nearly over 7,000 young people to come out in 20 days to register by using music and influencers and people that they care about speaking to messages of practical things that a person can do to empower themselves and not have to wait for a political party. And all of this stuff already exists in our Structures Act and our Constitution and our legislation, but nobody's taken the time to take young people through that particular thing. And if we don't do that, there's no way that we're going to get them to buy into the system. And of course, for some political parties, of course, it's a strategy not to have some people registered to vote, because it means that they then have to work harder to actually get those votes out, and it means that the micros are competitor. But that's why it's important for us as the general public to flood the voters roll, because that's the only way that you have some kind of carrot to get political parties to actually do what you want them to do. And that's what young people need to understand. No one's just going to do stuff because there's a lot of them. If they want to be able to get political parties to listen to them, they need to hit them where it hurts, and that's usually at the polls.
Absolutely. Fascinating information. And you make such excellent points about reaching young people where they want to be reached, and reaching them through ways that they like to communicate. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Mbali Ntuli is from the Groundwork Collective, an organisation working with young people, getting them to register ahead of next year's polls. All right, still ahead, we've got your business news and the Joburg